The history of architecture in New York City. The history of architecture in New York City is a rich narrative that reflects the city's economic, cultural, and technological evolution. From its early colonial days to its status as a global metropolis, New York's architectural landscape has continuously evolved, influencing and being influenced by broader global movements. From its early colonial days to its status as a global metropolis, New York's architectural landscape has continuously evolved, influencing and being influenced by broader global movements. Here's a look at the key periods and architectural styles that have shaped New York's skyline. Colonial and early architecture, 1600s-1700s, Dutch colonial period. New York City, then New Amsterdam, was established by Dutch settlers in 1624. The early architecture was largely influenced by the Dutch, characterized by steeply pitched roofs, brickwork, and simple facades. Some of these influences can still be seen in areas like the Wyckoff House, 1652, the oldest surviving structure in the city. English colonial influence. After the English took control in 1664, the architecture began reflecting English styles. Brick and stone structures became more common, with Georgian-style buildings becoming popular. Federal and Greek Revival, late 1700s, early 1800s, Federal style, 1780-1830. After the American Revolution, New York began adopting the Federal style, characterized by symmetrical facades, brick construction, and classical details like fanlights and columns. Examples include the Hamilton Grange, 1802, the home of Alexander Hamilton, and townhouses in Greenwich Village. Greek Revival, 1830-1860. Greek Revival became prominent in the early 19th century, symbolizing the new republic's ideals. The Merchant's House Museum, 1832, is a fine example, with its classical columns and pediments. Public buildings, banks, and private homes embraced this style as a statement of democracy and classical grandeur. Cast iron architecture, mid-1800s, Industrial Revolution and cast iron buildings. The mid-19th century saw the rise of cast iron architecture, especially in neighborhoods like Soho. Cast iron allowed for faster, cheaper construction while incorporating intricate details. Buildings like the Hawote Building, 1857, are iconic for their detailed facades and large windows, enabled by cast iron framing. Innovations in commercial architecture. This period marked a turning point, where technology and industry began influencing urban architecture. Cast iron buildings often housed factories, warehouses, and retail spaces, marking the start of New York's commercial building boom. Gilded Age and Beaux-Arts, late 1800s, early 1900s, Gilded Age and Skyscrapers. The late 19th century, during the Gilded Age, was marked by wealth and opulence. Architects began experimenting with height, leading to some of the earliest skyscrapers, such as the Flatiron Building, 1902. Steel framing and elevators allowed buildings to soar upward. The New York Public Library, 1911, and Grand Central Terminal, 1913, are prominent examples, showcasing the era's commitment to classical grandeur and civic pride. Art Deco and the skyscraper boom, 1920s-1940s, Art Deco era. The 1920s and 1930s were dominated by the Art Deco style, which celebrated modernity, luxury, and optimism. Buildings like the Chrysler Building, 1930, and the Empire State Building, 1931, exemplified the sleek, geometric designs of Art Deco, with their emphasis on verticality, ornamentation, and new materials like chrome and stainless steel. Skyscrapers became symbols of corporate power and modern innovation. Post-war modernism, 1950s-1970s. This approach, led by architects like Ludwig Mies van der Rohe and Le Corbusier, embraced minimalism, steel and glass construction, and functionalism. The Seagram Building, 1958, by Mies van der Rohe and Leverhouse, 1952, by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill exemplify this style, marking a shift from ornamentation to sleek, functional designs. Brutalism. In the 1960s and 1970s, brutalism, with its emphasis on raw concrete and imposing geometric forms, influenced many public and institutional buildings, such as the Metropolitan Correctional Center and the Pruitt-Ego Apartments. Postmodernism and contemporary styles, 1980s present. Postmodern architecture. In the late 20th century, architects began to push back against the rigidity of modernism, embracing a more eclectic, decorative approach. Philip Johnson's AT&T Building, now 550 Madison Avenue, 1984, is a prime example of postmodernism, with its Chippendale top and references to classical forms. The One World Trade Center, 2013, designed by David Childs, stands as a symbol of resilience, combining modern aesthetics with functionality and sustainability. High-tech and eco-friendly designs, modern projects like the High Line, 2009-2014, an elevated park built on a former railway track, and Hudson Yards showcase innovation in urban design and green architecture. The city is embracing new materials, technologies, and sustainable building practices. Adaptive reuse and preservation. Historic preservation. As New York evolved, efforts to preserve its architectural history intensified, especially after the demolition of Penn Station in 1963. Adaptive reuse. Recent decades have seen a surge in adaptive reuse projects, where old industrial buildings and warehouses have been transformed into residential or commercial spaces. Neighborhoods like Soho, Dumbo, and the Meatpacking District are filled with such conversions, blending the old with the new. Postmodernism in New York, 1980s-2000s. Postmodernism emerged as a reaction against the austerity and functionalism of modernist and international-style architecture. This era was characterized by buildings that often embraced irony, eclecticism, and symbolism, contrasting the earlier strict minimalism. Key features of postmodernism: use of historical references and eclectic styles, mixing classical and modern elements. Ornamentation and decoration were reintroduced, often in exaggerated or playful forms. Buildings featured bold, contrasting colors and diverse materials. Emphasis on symbolism and whimsy in architecture, sometimes at the expense of strict functionalism. Notable postmodern buildings in New York. AT&T Building, 550 Madison Avenue, 1984. By Philip Johnson and John Berge. Perhaps the most iconic postmodern building in New York, the AT&T Building, later Sony Tower and 550 Madison, is known for its striking, Chippendale top, a playful reference to historical furniture design. Its use of granite and classical motifs marked a clear departure from the glass and steel modernist towers of earlier decades. Lipstick Building, 1986, by Philip Johnson. Named for its elliptical shape and red granite cladding, this building is a classic example of postmodern design. The structure has a playful, sculptural form that stands out against the traditional rectangular shapes of nearby office towers. Port Authority Bus Terminal Renovation, 1981, by Raymond Abraham. Postmodern legacy in New York. Contemporary architecture in New York. 2000s-2024. Moving into the 21st century, New York City's architectural landscape evolved dramatically with the rise of contemporary architecture, characterized by cutting-edge technology, bold experimentation, and increasing attention to sustainability and urban planning. Architects began exploring new forms, materials, and designs, often emphasizing sustainability, integration with public spaces, and creating iconic landmarks that redefine the skyline. 1. High-tech and neo-modernism, 2000s-2010s. 1. High-tech architecture emphasized the use of modern technology, advanced materials, and structural expression. 1. Buildings in this style often celebrated their engineering by exposing structural elements like steel beams and glass walls. Neo-modernism sought to revive the sleek, minimalist aesthetics of earlier modernist movements but with new technology and design philosophies. Notable high-tech and neo-modern buildings. Hearst Tower, 2006, by Norman Foster. Its striking design features a diagrid facade, a grid of diagonal beams, that reduces the need for steel and creates a dramatic visual effect. The tower is built atop a historic base, blending old and new. Bank of America Tower, 2009, by Cook Fox Architects. At its completion, the Bank of America Tower was one of the most environmentally friendly buildings in the world, earning LEED Platinum certification. The building's glass facade and innovative green technologies reflect the priorities of high-tech architecture, focusing on sustainability and energy efficiency. Parametric and sculptural architecture, 2010s present. The 2010s saw a rise in parametric design and sculptural architecture, which relied on computer algorithms and digital tools to create complex, flowing forms. These buildings are characterized by organic shapes, fluid forms, and a departure from rigid geometric patterns. As technology advanced, architects were able to create more daring and unconventional structures. Notable parametric and sculptural buildings: One World Trade Center, 2013, by David Childs, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. The Vessel, 2019, by Thomas Heatherwick. Located in Hudson Yards, the Vessel is an interactive public structure made of interconnecting staircases. It represents the new trend of sculptural, user-engaged architecture. The Vessel is both a public artwork and a unique piece of architecture that invites people to experience it from the inside out. Zaha Hadid's 520 West 28th Street, 2017. This luxury condominium building near the High Line is a striking example of Hadid's signature flowing, organic forms. The curving, futuristic design stands out in a city dominated by rectilinear structures. Sustainable and eco-friendly architecture, 2000s present. As climate change and environmental concerns became more pressing, architects in New York increasingly focused on sustainable architecture. The concept of green buildings goes beyond energy efficiency, incorporating eco-friendly materials, green roofs, water conservation, and strategies for reducing a building's carbon footprint. Key trends. LEED certification. New York has seen a surge in LEED-certified buildings, which prioritize energy efficiency, indoor air quality, and the use of sustainable materials. Green roofs and vertical gardens. Buildings such as the Via 57 West, 2016, by BRK Ingalls Group, feature green spaces integrated into the design, creating a blend of nature and architecture. Notable sustainable projects. The Bloomberg Building, 731 Lexington Avenue, 2004, by Cesar Pelli. One of the first high-rises to incorporate sustainability features like energy-efficient HVAC systems and sustainable materials. The Edge in Williamsburg, 2009, a residential complex with numerous eco-friendly features, including energy-efficient appliances, a rainwater collection system, and a rooftop garden. Urban integration in public spaces, 2010s-2024. Contemporary architecture in New York has also focused heavily on urban integration and the creation of public spaces. The High Line and Hudson Yards developments exemplify how architects and urban planners are now designing buildings and spaces that engage with the public, creating more than just isolated structures but environments that interact with the city. Key projects. The High Line, 2009-2014, by James Corner Field Operations, Diller Scofidio plus Renfro, and Pete Udolph. The transformation of an abandoned elevated rail line into a public park was a landmark urban project. It not only brought greenery into the urban environment but also spurred the development of striking new architecture along its route. Hudson Yards, 2012 present. One of the largest real estate developments in U.S. history, Hudson Yards is a new district filled with modern skyscrapers, public spaces, and commercial areas. Key buildings include 15 Hudson Yards, The Shed, a cultural center with a dynamic, expandable shell, and The Vessel. Future trends, 2024 and beyond. Carbon-neutral buildings. With climate initiatives in place, many new projects aim for zero carbon emissions, like the Climate Mobilization Act, which sets the city on a path to reduce emissions from buildings. Conclusion. The architectural history of New York from the postmodern era to today is a reflection of the city's dynamism and creativity. As technology advances and sustainability becomes a priority, the city continues to embrace bold, innovative designs while honoring its architectural heritage.